To fund SNAP. The federal food assistance program was set to be frozen tomorrow as the government shutdown stretches into November. But more than 24 Democratic-led states sued the Trump administration over suspending the benefits. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joins us now to discuss. So, Jessica, these judges say the federal government needs to use contingency funds to keep SNAP up and running. Can you break that down for us?
Absolutely. There was a question as to whether or not the federal government was mandated based on the terms of the statute to continue to provide these SNAP benefits, even though we are in a government shutdown and no new budget has been passed. We now have two different district court judges looking at the statutes and saying that they believe the fact that there are contingency funds there and looking at, again, the language of the statute indicates that the federal government must provide at least partial funding for these programs. We should remind everybody that these are temporary restraining orders, meaning this is not a final ruling on the merit. Both judges are looking at who's likely to succeed, where there will be an irreparable risk of harm if you do or don't grant this emergency relief. And what we're seeing is in one case, the judge is saying, federal government, I think you need to pay. Let me know by Monday. In another case, a judge is saying something very similar, which is you need to pay, essentially tell me by Monday that you did. But both of them globally reaching the same conclusion.
And so what do we expect to happen in the next few days?
Okay, so imagine you're Donald Trump. You spent years fighting in court, filing appeal after appeal, delaying sentencing, blocking penalties, using every legal trick to avoid consequences, and you've always had one more option, one more appeal, one more court that might save you. And then the Supreme Court, the final court, the last possible place to turn, they say no. They reject your emergency appeal. They decline to intervene. They let the lower court ruling stand, and suddenly you're out of options, out of delays, out of legal maneuvers. You have no way out. That's where Trump is right now. The Supreme Court just rejected his final emergency appeal, refused to block his criminal sentencing, refused to save his tariffs, refused to intervene in the financial penalties against him. And legal analysts are saying this is it. This is the end of the road. Trump has exhausted every appeal. Every legal pathway is closed. And now he has to face consequences. Criminal convictions proceed. Financial penalties become enforceable. Policy setbacks are permanent. And there's nothing he can do to stop it. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Appeals. And the question is whether or not these decisions will be put on pause while these cases are appealed. Obviously, we're talking about a situation where people may not be able to access these benefits. So when you're thinking about why do you typically grant emergency relief, one of the things you look at is who could be harmed, again, by granting or not granting the relief. I think that that will weigh heavily in favor of trying to get some money to people who, again, would otherwise be denied the benefits while these cases are appealed, but it's not a guarantee.
So if one of those 42 million Americans who would be impacted is watching this now, how would you say these rulings will affect whether or not they can get those benefits tomorrow or Sunday or Monday or the next day after that?
So I would say great question. These trial court rulings indicate that the 1 in 8 Americans who rely on these benefits should be able to get at least partial benefits. Having said that, we know these rulings will be appealed. So what we need to look at in the next hours is whether these temporary restraining orders, or in one case, almost granting the temporary restraining order, whether or not they're paused while the cases are appealed. That could mean people will not get benefits, at least for a temporary period of time.
Okay, Jessica Levinson, thank you.
The Supreme Court's decision was devastating in its brevity. They didn't write long opinions explaining their reasoning. They just said no, declined to hear the case. Let the lower court ruling stand, and that brevity is actually more damaging than a detailed opinion would be, because it shows the court doesn't even think Trump's arguments are worth discussing, doesn't think there's any serious legal question, just sees frivolous appeals designed to delay. And they're not playing along anymore. They're not giving Trump more time, not allowing more delays, not treating him differently than any other defendant. And that's huge, because Trump's entire legal strategy has been built on delay, on filing endless appeals, on using the slowness of the system to avoid consequences, But when the Supreme Court refuses to hear your appeal, when they just let lower court rulings stand, that strategy fails. There's nowhere else to go, no higher court to appeal to. It's over. The criminal sentencing in the New York hush money case is now proceeding. The Supreme Court specifically noted that the sentencing won't significantly impact Trump's ability to serve as president because the trial court plans to impose an unconditional discharge, meaning Trump won't go to jail, won't be on probation, but he will have a criminal conviction on his record forever, a felony conviction that can never be erased. And that's politically and personally devastating because Trump has spent his entire life avoiding being labeled a criminal, has fought every allegation, has claimed every prosecution is a witch hunt, and now officially, permanently, he's a convicted felon. That's his legacy. That's how history will remember him, and there's nothing he can do about it. The Supreme Court made sure of that by refusing to block the sentencing. The tariff ruling is equally devastating. Trump imposed sweeping global tariffs, claimed he had emergency powers to do it, said the International Emergency Economic Powers Act gave him authority, and courts at every level said no, said that's not what the law means, said Trump manufactured an emergency to bypass Congress, said the tariffs are illegal and have to be struck down, and Trump appealed to the Supreme Court, asked them to save his signature economic policy, and the court said no, let the lower court ruling stand, meaning billions of dollars in tariffs have to be refunded, meaning Trump's economic policy is invalidated, meaning he doesn't have the executive authority he claimed, and there's no appeal left, no way to reverse it, the tariffs are gone, and they're not coming back. Legal experts are calling this the final word from the judicial branch. The Supreme Court has spoken. Lower courts can now enforce their rulings without fear of being overturned. Prosecutors can proceed with sentencing. Civil courts can collect financial penalties. And Trump has no legal recourse. Can't file another appeal. Can't claim he's waiting for the Supreme Court to decide. The Supreme Court has decided. They've rejected his appeals, and now consequences follow. And those consequences are massive. Criminal conviction, billions in tariff refunds, financial penalties that threaten his business, and the collapse of his claims to expanded executive authority, all happening at once, all unavoidable, all permanent. The decision also signals something important for Trump's other cases. Because if the Supreme Court won't intervene to block sentencing in the New York case, why would they intervene in other cases? If they won't save his tariffs, why would they save other executive actions? The answer is they won't. Trump's delay tactics, his immunity claims, his arguments for special treatment, none of them are working anymore. Not at any level of the judiciary. And that means his other cases proceed too. Other prosecutions move forward, other financial penalties get enforced, other policy defeats become permanent. Because the Supreme Court has made clear they're not going to save Trump, not going to give him special treatment, not going to allow endless delays. The time for accountability has arrived, and Trump can't stop it. Congressional Democrats are celebrating, calling this a watershed moment for accountability, saying it proves no one is above the law, using it to justify their investigations and oversight. And Republicans are scrambling, some defending Trump, some distancing themselves, some just staying quiet because they don't know what to say, because this isn't a decision they can spin. This isn't a loss they can blame on one biased judge. This is the Supreme Court, the court with a conservative supermajority, the court where Trump appointed 3 justices, and they just rejected him, just said his appeals lack merit, just left him with no way out. So buckle up, because we're about to break down exactly what this ruling means and why Trump's legal position has never been worse. All right, let's dig into the specifics of what the Supreme Court actually did, because the details matter, the reasoning matters, and the implications for Trump's future matter enormously. So we start with the criminal sentencing case. Trump was convicted in New York on 34 felony counts related to falsifying business records to cover up hush money payments. And after the conviction, Trump's lawyers filed endless motions to delay sentencing, claimed he couldn't be sentenced while running for president, claimed it would interfere with his campaign, claimed it was politically motivated, and when those arguments failed in lower courts, they appealed to the Supreme Court, filed an emergency application, asking the court to block the sentencing. And the Supreme Court said no, denied the application. And in their brief order, they explained why. They noted that the trial court plans to impose an unconditional discharge, meaning no jail time, no probation, just a conviction on the record. And they said that won't significantly impact Trump's ability to serve as president, so there's no reason to delay, no emergency that justifies Supreme Court intervention. The sentencing can proceed. And that reasoning is important because it shows the court isn't treating Trump differently than any other defendant. If you're convicted, you get sentenced. That's how the system works. And the fact that you're famous, or that you won an election, or that sentencing might be politically inconvenient, none of that matters. The law applies equally, and Trump has to face sentencing just like anyone else would. And that sentencing, even though it's just an unconditional discharge, is still a conviction, still a felony on Trump's permanent record. still something that will define his legacy. Because Trump isn't just being sentenced to no jail time, he's being sentenced to history, remembering him as a convicted felon, as someone who was found guilty by a jury of his peers, as someone who committed crimes, and that can never be undone, can never be appealed away. It's permanent. The tariff case is different, but equally significant. Trump imposed global tariffs claiming emergency authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. This law gives the president certain powers during genuine national emergencies, but Trump stretched the definition, declared that trade imbalances were an emergency, that America's trade deficit threatened national security, and therefore he could impose massive tariffs without congressional approval. And courts at every level rejected that argument, said IEEPA doesn't give the president unlimited authority to reshape trade policy, said Congress never intended for emergency powers to be used this way, said Trump manufactured an emergency to bypass constitutional requirements, and they struck down the tariffs, ordered them invalidated, ordered billions in refunds to businesses that paid them, and Trump appealed to the Supreme Court, and the court declined to hear the case. Let the lower court ruling stand, and that's devastating for multiple reasons. First, it invalidates Trump's signature economic policy. The tariffs were central to his economic message. We're supposed to protect American workers and bring manufacturing back, and now they're gone, declared illegal, wiped away, and billions of dollars have to be refunded, money that Trump's administration collected and spent, money that now has to be returned, and that creates massive budget problems, creates questions about how to fund programs that were built on tariff revenue, creates a fiscal crisis on top of a legal crisis. Second, it establishes precedent about presidential power. The court is saying presidents can't manufacture emergencies to bypass Congress, can't use vague statutory language to claim unlimited authority, can't reshape major policy areas without clear congressional authorization. And that precedent applies to everything Trump might try to do, every other claim of executive authority, every other attempt to govern through emergency declarations. The court has drawn a line, and Trump can't cross it. The Supreme Court also sent a signal about Trump's immunity claims, because in refusing to block the criminal sentencing, they implicitly rejected Trump's argument that he has special immunity, that he can't be prosecuted or sentenced like ordinary citizens, that his status as president or former president puts him above the law. And the court said no to all of that, said Trump gets sentenced like anyone else, said there's no special immunity, said the criminal justice system applies to everyone, and that rejection of immunity claims is going to affect Trump's other cases. Because if he doesn't have immunity from state prosecution, why would he have immunity from federal prosecution? If he can be sentenced for crimes committed before his presidency, why couldn't he be prosecuted for crimes committed during his presidency? The answers are becoming clear. He doesn't have immunity. He can be prosecuted. He can face consequences. And the Supreme Court isn't going to save him. Legal experts are emphasizing that this is the end of Trump's legal options. When the Supreme Court declines to hear your case, that's it. There's no appeal beyond the Supreme Court, no higher authority. The lower court rulings become final. And in Trump's case, that means criminal conviction stands, tariffs are invalidated, financial penalties are enforceable, and there's nothing Trump can do legally to change any of it. His only options now are political. Try to use his position as president to influence enforcement. Try to get Congress to pass laws that override court decisions. Try to pardon himself or have his Justice Department drop cases. But legally, through the courts, he's out of moves, has no appeals left, has no legal arguments that haven't been rejected, has exhausted every pathway, and that's unprecedented. No president in modern history has faced this level of judicial rejection, has had the Supreme Court close the door so completely. The financial implications are staggering. The tariff refunds alone could be tens of billions of dollars, money that has to come from somewhere, either through budget cuts or through borrowing or through finding new revenue, and that creates political problems because nobody wants their programs cut to pay for Trump's illegal tariffs. Nobody wants to borrow more money to refund businesses, and finding new revenue means raising taxes or cutting elsewhere, all politically toxic options. Beyond the tariffs, there are the civil judgments against Trump personally, hundreds of millions in penalties for fraud, for sexual assault, for defamation, and those penalties are now enforceable, can be collected, can result in asset seizures if Trump doesn't pay, and Trump's ability to pay is unclear. His wealth is mostly in real estate, not liquid, and liquidating properties to pay judgments. That damages his business, damages his brand, damages his net worth. So the financial consequences of these Supreme Court decisions ripple out in every direction, affect the federal budget, affect Trump's personal finances, affect his business empire, all at once. The timing makes this even more significant because this is happening as Trump prepares to take office, as he's forming his administration, as he's planning his agenda. And instead of focusing on policy, instead of planning initiatives, he's dealing with legal disasters, dealing with having to refund billions in tariffs, dealing with criminal sentencing, dealing with financial penalties. And all of that is a massive distraction, takes up time and energy and political capital, makes it harder to govern, harder to maintain support, harder to project strength. Because presidents are supposed to win, supposed to succeed, supposed to make things happen. And Trump is losing, is facing defeat after defeat in court, is being told by the Supreme Court that he has no way out. And that perception of weakness, that image of someone who's cornered, that's politically devastating. Republicans are struggling to respond. Some are attacking the courts, claiming judicial overreach, claiming Trump is being treated unfairly. But those attacks ring hollow when it's the Supreme Court making the decisions, when it's a court with a conservative majority, when it's justices Trump himself appointed. Hard to claim bias under those circumstances. Other Republicans are just staying quiet, not defending Trump, but not attacking him either, just trying to avoid the issue, hoping it goes away, but it's not going away, because these Supreme Court decisions are final, are permanent, are going to keep generating consequences and headlines and political problems for months and years, and Democrats are using every bit of it, running ads about Trump, the convicted felon, about Trump's illegal tariffs, about Trump losing at every level of the judiciary, about accountability finally arriving, and those messages are resonating with voters who are tired of chaos, who want leaders who follow the law, who care about whether powerful people face consequences. So let's break down what this Supreme Court ruling means, why it leaves Trump with no way out, what the implications are for his presidency, his legal future, his finances, and his political standing. Because this isn't just another legal setback, this is the Supreme Court closing every door, rejecting every appeal, leaving Trump with no options, and the consequences are going to shape everything that happens next. First, the criminal conviction is now permanent. Trump will be sentenced, will have a felony on his record forever, and there's no appeal left, no way to overturn it, no legal maneuver that can erase it. That conviction defines Trump's legacy, means history will remember him as a criminal, as someone who committed felonies and was convicted by a jury, and for someone who's built his entire identity on being a winner, on being successful, on being above the fray. That's devastating. That's a permanent stain that can never be removed, and it affects everything. Affects how people view him, affects his business relationships, affects his political standing, because convicted felons face stigma, face questions about their judgment and character, face barriers in business and politics, and Trump now carries that label forever. Second, the tariff ruling invalidates Trump's economic policy, his signature achievement, the thing he campaigned on, the policy that was supposed to bring back American manufacturing, and the Supreme Court said it's illegal, said Trump didn't have authority, said the tariffs have to go, and billions have to be refunded. And that's not just a policy defeat, that's a complete repudiation of Trump's approach to executive power. The court is saying you can't govern this way, can't manufacture emergencies, can't bypass Congress, can't claim unlimited authority, and that repudiation affects everything else Trump might want to do, every other executive action he might take, every other policy he might implement. Because if the tariffs were illegal, what else might be illegal? What other actions might court strike down? The answer is potentially a lot, and that makes Trump's presidency constrained, limited, unable to act unilaterally the way he wants. And for someone who sees the presidency as unlimited power, that's infuriating and paralyzing. Third, the financial exposure is massive. Trump faces billions in tariff refunds, hundreds of millions in civil judgments, asset seizure risks, and the Supreme Court has made clear all of that is enforceable. Courts can collect, can take property, can force liquidation, and Trump can't stop it through appeals, can't delay indefinitely, has to actually pay or face consequences, and that threatens his business empire, threatens properties that bear his name, threatens his wealth, and wealth is core to Trump's identity, to how he sees himself and wants others to see him, and watching that wealth be taken by courts, by judgments, by enforcement actions, that's personally devastating. Beyond the practical financial problems, beyond the business implications, it's an attack on Trump's self-image, on his sense of who he is, and that's going to affect his behavior, make him more desperate, more willing to take risks, more likely to do things that create new problems. Fourth, the precedent for other cases. The Supreme Court's rejection of Trump's appeals signals that similar tactics won't work elsewhere, that immunity claims will fail, that delay strategies will be rejected, that courts at every level should proceed with prosecutions in civil cases without fear of being overturned. And that's going to embolden prosecutors, going to make them more aggressive, more willing to bring charges, more confident that convictions will stand, because they know the Supreme Court isn't going to save Trump, isn't going to overturn their cases, isn't going to allow endless delays. So expect more indictments, more trials, more convictions, all proceeding more quickly, all resulting in consequences that Trump can't appeal away, because the Supreme Court has made clear they're done giving Trump special treatment, done allowing him to abuse the system, done letting him delay accountability. Fifth, the political damage. Trump's brand has always been built on winning, on success, on being someone who beats the system. And this Supreme Court ruling shows him losing, shows him defeated at every level, shows him out of options, and that damages the brand, makes Trump look weak, makes him look like a loser. And for his supporters who are invested in the image of Trump as a fighter who always wins, that's disillusioning, makes them question their support, makes them wonder if Trump is still the right leader. And for swing voters, for independents, it confirms what they suspected, that Trump is a criminal, that his policies are illegal, that he's corrupt, and the courts are finally holding him accountable. And that perception shift is going to cost Trump politically, going to make it harder to govern, harder to pass legislation, harder to maintain party support, because politicians don't want to be associated with someone who's losing, who's facing criminal sentencing, who's being rejected by the Supreme Court. 6. The GOP reaction. Republicans are divided, some still defending Trump, claiming he's being persecuted, but others are distancing themselves, questioning whether Trump can lead, wondering if the party needs a different direction. And those divisions weaken Republicans, make it harder to unify, harder to govern, harder to win elections. Because voters don't trust divided parties, don't believe parties that can't agree on basic questions about their own leader, and Democrats are exploiting those divisions, peeling off moderate Republicans, building coalitions, passing legislation, using Trump's legal disasters to strengthen their own position, and that's going to continue, going to accelerate as more consequences arrive, as Trump faces sentencing, as tariff refunds create budget problems, as financial penalties get enforced. Every new development creates more division, more opportunity for Democrats, more problems for Trump and the GOP. 7th, the international implications. America's allies and adversaries are watching, seeing an American president rejected by his own Supreme Court, seeing American policies declared illegal, seeing chaos and dysfunction, and that affects America's standing in the world, affects whether other countries trust American leadership, whether they want to make deals with an administration that's in constant legal turmoil, whether they believe American commitments are reliable. And the answer is increasingly no. Other countries are hedging, making alternative plans, building relationships that don't depend on America, because they see an administration that's weak, that's distracted by legal problems, that can't even get its Supreme Court to support its policies. And that loss of international standing has real consequences for trade, for security, for diplomacy, for America's ability to shape world events. 8th, the historical legacy. Trump will be remembered as the president who was rejected by the Supreme Court, who was convicted of felonies, whose signature policies were declared illegal, who faced criminal sentencing while in office. That's the legacy. That's what history books will say. And that legacy matters, affects how future generations understand this period, affects what lessons are drawn, affects whether Trump is seen as a leader or as a cautionary tale. And based on this Supreme Court ruling, based on the complete rejection of Trump's legal arguments, history is going to judge him harshly, going to see him as someone who abused power, who tried to place himself above the law, who failed when the legal system finally held him accountable. 9th, what Trump can still do, because even though he's out of legal options, he still has political power, still is president, still controls executive branch agencies, and he could try to use that power, could try to have his Justice Department drop federal cases, could try to pardon himself, could try to use executive orders to undermine court rulings, could try to rally his base to pressure judges and prosecutors. But all of those options create new problems, new controversies, new legal challenges, and they probably don't work, because state cases can't be pardoned by federal authority. Court rulings can't be ignored without consequences, and rallying supporters to intimidate judges is obstruction. So Trump's political options are limited, and using them just creates more problems, more scandals, more evidence of abuse of power. 10th, the bottom line. The Supreme Court has left Trump with no way out, no appeals left, no legal arguments that work, no delays available, just consequences, criminal sentencing, tariff refunds, financial penalties, policy defeats, and Trump has to face all of it. Can't escape, can't delay, can't appeal. This is accountability. This is what happens when the legal system finally works, when courts at every level say enough, when even the Supreme Court says no more delays, and Trump is discovering that there are limits. That power doesn't make you immune, that eventually consequences arrive, and when they do, when you've exhausted every appeal, when you're out of options, you have to face them. That's where Trump is now, facing consequences with no way out, and what happens next is going to define his presidency and his legacy. Stay tuned.